Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting of the Virtual Tasting Society. Today, we're excited to welcome a brand we were lucky enough to discover it during the pandemic. I think it was 2020, 2021 when we first had you on. It was
hmm
a very nerdy educational seminar. It was the first one we ever did that was a blind. Learned how to taste without knowing what the samples were. It was really amazing. But at the time, you didn't have enough spirit available for us to do a deep dive into Copperworks. Now, fast forward a few years later, we're so honored and excited to have you back. Jason Parker, one of the founders of Copperworks Distillery out in Seattle. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're excited to taste eight different expressions, all made in-house, everything made by you guys, nothing sourced. Some fun casks we're going to taste today, some really, really delicious expressions. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to learning and tasting and falling in love with the brand. So please take it away, Jason.
Well, great. Thank you, Adam. And thanks for reminding me that it was during the pandemic. I remember that was a really fun tasting, and I had forgotten when that was. How many of you that are online, just show of hands or an icon, have were at that tasting 4 or 5 years ago? Yep. Okay, good. And how many of you have ever, I should say, never tasted anything from Copperworks? Great. Okay. So we're going to have a chance to explore a little bit about a bunch of things. Let me give you a quick round on myself, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. As I always say, if I don't know the answer, I'll make up one. So, be your job to figure out if I'm lying to you. No, I'm just teasing. I started my beverage alcohol career in 2000. No, I'm sorry, 1989. I started as the first brewer of a brewery out here called the Pike Place Brewery. So it's later changed its name to Pike Brewing Company, and then very recently closed its all of its facilities, but one little tasting room. But that's another story. So I got into brewing in '89, left Pike after a couple of years to go back to college, did chemistry and microbiology. Had the opportunity to help open a place in Olympia called Fishtail Ales. They make an organic beer. And then graduated from school, came up and worked in Ballard, Seattle area, with a company named Red Hook. They were still located only in Seattle. And then stole their ideas and got to build Pyramid breweries and was brewmaster at Pyramid for 7 years. So had been really into brewing for a long time. And in the year 2000, got out of brewing. I was living in Seattle still. And if you had a heartbeat and you lived in Seattle, you could get a job in IT around 2000. So I did. I got jobs in IT. I loved it. I ended up getting a master's in information management, thinking I would never go back to production. The last 7 years, I worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, giving away Bill's money. That was a total blast. And then in 2008, June, it became legal to do craft distilling in Washington State, which is where I was living and still am now after 43 years. My my interest in that peaked because I realized that a lot of the new distillers getting into distilling were accountants and Boeing engineers and Microsoft executives who had retired. They knew nothing about beverage alcohol production. They were fans, they were drinkers, but they knew nothing about producing. So I felt like I'd have a chance to jump in there and do something and kind of leapfrog the pack. So we built Copperworks Distilling on the Seattle waterfront, opened in 2013 with the goal of making American single malt whiskey, a concept that didn't exist yet, but 100% malted barley. And we made everything from a beer with no hops. I'm going to get a lot more into that, but I'd like us to start drinking. So the very first thing we're going to drink is called Maltsmith. Do you all have that sample with you?
We
Right?
should. Can you tell us? So some of these are cast strength, some of these are not. What's the order we should put them in? I had an order
Um,
that I posted online, but I just wanted to confirm.
here's the way I'd like to go. I'd like to go Maltsmith, Farmsmith, Peatsmith. Those
Okay.
are our core lineups. They're all 100 proof. And then we're going to do a couple of other finished cask finish versions of 100 around 100 proof. Then we'll do some cask strengths. And I'm actually going to leave the color cask to last because it's going to have such a flavor impact that it's going to be hard to go back and taste something after it.
So what order
So
should we in case people want to line them up and kind of let them open in their glass?
yeah. So we'll go Maltsmith,
Hmm.
Farmsmith, Peatsmith. Let's do 11 year and then uh remind me, do you have the Pondera cask or the red wine cask or
Yep,
both?
we have the red wine, we have the color cask, Amaro cask, and cask number 484, the
So
malt.
we'll go red wine, um, Amaro, and then the single cask, and then color cask.
Perfect. Thank
That
you.
work?
Yep,
Pulling corks out of bottles right now.
there you
One of my
go.
favorite sounds. Okay, so the malt smith. Um, the last beer that I made at the Pike Place Brewery was called the Kilt Lifter. We even have another story about that I'll talk to you later. But the Kilt Lifter was a Scotch ale, and I'm going to give you the background about why I picked that in a little bit. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about it. It has five different malts, and when I mean malt, I mean 100% malted barley. So when I talk about five malts, I mean different kilns. 75% of it is pale malt, 10% it is caramel 30-37, 6% is special B, 6% is um, biscuit, and then 4% is melanoidin. So that's the grain bill for this. And we ferment it with brewer's yeast. We do a 7-day fermentation, a 2-week conditioning. So it's in the fermenters for 21 days. And then we put that bright beer into the wash still, do 2 washes, and then redistill it in the spirit still. So let's give that a little nose.
Just for my clarity, because I always it took me a long time to wrap my brain around this. When American single malt producers talk about a malt bill or a mash bill, it's all malted barley. It's just
That's right.
roasted to a different degree that gives it a different name. That's about it, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's such a great concept because I want to get a couple of sips on lips and get some feedback. Let's get right back into that after we taste this one. And then I'm going to deep dive a little bit into what malted barley is and
Yeah.
why it differentiates from even Scotch whiskey or Irish whiskey or Japanese whiskey, malted barley. So give that a nose and a little taste. And remember, this is 100 proof. So if you, after tasting it a time or two, if you think you need to put a little bit of water in to lower the proof, you certainly should. But you probably won't need to with Copperworks.
Why the 100 proof? Why the 50%? How did you come to that?
Yeah, great question. The answer to that's going to come out even more in depth when we talk about barley bill or about the brewing process. But let's talk for a minute. The higher the proof, the longer the finish. But the higher the proof, the more the burn. So you have a decision to make. Are you going to force the drinker to endure the alcohol pain for a longer finish? Or are you going to lower that alcohol a little bit, reduce the pain, but reduce the finish? So what we decided, we were bottling each release at a different proof, and we would try to match that number. The lowest we ever did was 91, but normally we were 100, 104, 106, sometimes 110 proof. And we decided that it actually was best at about 100 proof consistently. And that sure did make label approval easy. So we ended up sticking with the 100 proof as our standard proof. We feel that that gives enough heat to be whiskey. You can mix it into a cocktail and you still have a lot of legs and a lot of endurance there in that whiskey with the modifiers, but it doesn't burn as much if you're drinking it neat. And let me get your thoughts on this. I mean, what do you guys feel? Is this, give me some words. Let's hear what you think about it.
I have been a huge fan since the first time we had you guys on, and I haven't actually had a lot of your newer stuff. So I'm pretty pleased with how well this comes across. I definitely get some of that beer influence from the yeast, but it's got a nice crispness to it, and it's actually just a little bit refreshing.
Great. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it a lot as well. I had Copperworks before, but it's been a little bit, maybe like a year ago or so, and really enjoyed it. I think ASM being an unofficial an official thing, but yeah, it's a lot of, I get like honey and cinnamon sweetness, but like buttered toast at the same time. And then especially on the nose, there's a note that I don't know what it is, but it reminds me of Westward to the south,
Hmm.
like probably because they're also brewers, beer guys. So there's something there that I can't detect, but I love it. Very nice.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I have a lot of nice like florals and kind of a stone fruit on the palate, and then there's this kind of pine needle thing going on that's nice and gets into the refreshing minty direction. Really beautiful.
Yeah, that piney we'll talk about in a little bit too. It's a kind of a signature flavor from Copperworks. We'll talk about where that comes from and when we talk about fermentation. Well, thanks for those thoughts. So one of the things that you probably notice immediately is that it's not a Scotch, but it is a single malt whiskey. It's not a bourbon, but it does have a lot of that new oak barrel character. But it's not just that sweet new oak vanilla and caramels that you might get from a bourbon. We use both. We always buy brand new barrels. We put whiskey in brand new barrels. We can talk about the barrel program in a little bit as well. And then we reuse those barrels one more time. So after 3 to 5 years, the first time, we'll dump that, use that whiskey, and then fill them again. And when we fill them again, we usually keep them 6 to 9 years. It just depends again on what we're entering, what proof, and then how the barrel treats the whiskey. So, so this is the first time that we made a batch bigger than 8 barrels. We started with our first batch being 2 barrels. Actually, our very first batch, I think, was 6 barrels. And then we went down to 4, and then we did some 5s and 6s. We rarely did 8 barrels at a time. But eventually we got to the point where we, after 10 years, had a recipe that we really liked, and we had a flavor profile that we thought we would like to make our flagship. So we named all of our core concepts Smiths. So we have Maltsmith, Peatsmith, and Farmsmith. And the concept of the Smith is there's a hammerman. You can kind of see that design on my shirt. A guy's hammering out a copper still. He is a coppersmith. A little Easter egg in there. You can see what he's hammering is the C of Copperworks, and his arms form the W for the works. So it's a little that W is just a little Easter egg hiding in there. So that concept of having a consistent whiskey it took us 10 years to get to. And we did that by bringing our customers along for the ride as we experimented on single farm, single variety, single vintage barleys, different entry proofs, different cuts, different yeast strains, different brew houses, all sorts of different things that we played with in order to get the flavors we liked. And after 10 years, we felt like we knew enough to begin some standardization. So we have one whiskey that's our attempt is to be standard. That's the one you're drinking now. That's called Maltsmith. And we named it Maltsmith because it does feature those 5 different malt kilns. So if you're okay, Vadim, I'm going to jump into the conversation about barley and barley malting. Does anyone feel like they have a really good definition of malt that you'd like to share with us? And I can take off from there.
Basically, germinated barley is malted barley
Germinated and kilned. Yes,
and killed.
exactly. Right. So let's just think back about what a seed is. Barley is a grain, grain is a seed. Seeds want to grow plants. Inside that seed are carbohydrates, which is the way that seed stores energy. And on the outside of that seed is a husk, and that husk has a whole bunch of enzymes in it. And it's a little packet of energy designed to grow a plant. So if you get that barley, you harvest it out of the field, you put it into a silo and let it go through dormancy. That's 3 to 6 months of it sitting there thinking winter is here. And then you put it into a bed of warm water, it thinks spring's here and it starts to grow. And the way it starts is by the enzymes in that husk breaking down those carbohydrates into smaller sugars that it's going to use to eat to form a plant inside that husk. So a little leaf is growing underneath the husk and rootlets is starting to poke out. And right before that leaf pops out, you kill it. Now, it's a bit sad, but what you do is you just add hot air to it. And the slower and cooler you add the air, the lighter the color of the malt is. The hotter and faster you add the air, the darker the color of the malt is. So brewers have been taking advantage of this for, centuries, I should have said, by kilning, that is drying the barley at different temperatures to get all the gamut of flavors and colors that beer has. Now, let's think about what traditional single malt whiskey uses. So go back to Scotland. Hundreds of years ago, they also germinated and dried barley. And the first way they started drying barley was by laying it out in the sun. And then later they started blowing air through it, but they would have guys in these floor maltings with rakes and shovels tossing it so that those rootlets don't get into a ball and mat and start molding. And sadly enough, they could never blow hot air through there because it would malt the guys, and that apparently makes awful tasting whiskey. So they would just let the barley gently dry. And so everything they made was pale malt. They didn't make caramel malts and crystal malts and roasted malts and chocolate malts and all the things that brewers later were able to do with drum roasting. Well, if you're going to make a traditional product, you need to use traditional processes. So if you're going to make a scotch taste like scotch, you can't start using crystal malts and caramel malts and darker roasted malts because it's not going to taste like scotch. And if you're a Japanese distiller following a Scottish tradition, you're going to be bound by the same constraints. American single malt whiskey doesn't have a constraint. It didn't have a traditional flavor that it had to match. It wasn't trying to be scotch, like Japanese was actually trying to be scotch a little better. American single malt whiskey wasn't trying to be scotch. So when we made this, we decided that we were going to use those caramel and crystal malts, and we were going to focus on flavors that come from beer and then are distilled and captured. And that's an exploration into what barley can do in whiskeys. So one of the things you may notice in the Maltsmith is it's a little sweeter than a scotch. Scotch tends to be pretty dry and pretty compared to a Copperworks, not quite as thick. That sweetness is literally a residual sugar left over from the fermentation that didn't get converted into alcohol, and it coats the mouth and it makes the whiskey a little easier to drink. It also means that since it coats the mouth, we can bump up that alcohol and it doesn't burn because it is literally coating your tongue and your gums. So you can go a little higher. Whew, that was a ton of words there. So let me pause for a minute and see if we have any questions on that before we move to the Farmsmith.
That was awesome. My question is to wrap my head around the different malts or the toasting levels of the barley as like compared to beer. Does each one have like a pale malt would go into a pilsner and like a dark chocolate malt will go into a porter? Is that kind of where it's at? Like how would you draw those parallels?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So pale malt is what is the base of a lot of beers, a lot of ales, I should say. So it is they have a scale of measurement that they call Levobond or SRM. They're similar scales and almost exactly the same numbers. And they give you something that you can use to identify what the beer will look like when you've used that barley. And then you use percentages of it. So a good example is a standard pale ale if you went and ordered Sierra Nevada Pale Ale beer, would have about 85% pale malt. And then it'd have about 15% of some light caramel malts. And those malts would each have that SRM number. The pale malt might have an SRM of, oh, 2.8 to 3.5. So it's, and by the way, a chocolate malt would be around 280, and a black patent malt that you would use in a stout would be 400. So you've got this pretty wide gamut, and you're talking pale is way down there on the lowest end. Lower than that are Pilsner malts, Marzen, so things that are used in German styles to make a golden or straw-colored beer. Brewers know that color equates to flavor. So the things that you're tasting, melanoidins and my brain's not locking on the word right now, but flavor compounds are all released with heat, but it destroys both enzymes, so you're going to get a little bit less fermentation capability, and converts sugars from a sugar that a yeast can eat to a sugar that's too complex for a yeast to eat. So caramels are basically burned sugar, and they make delicious flavors, but they don't turn into alcohol, which is another great reason why traditional distilleries don't use them. They don't equal alcohol, and they're in the business of competing against other distilleries that are trying to get more alcohol from a ton of grain. So in fact, there is a gold standard is 440 liters of pure alcohol from metric ton of grain. If you're a old school Scottish distillery and Diageo recently bought you and you're hitting somewhere around 320 liters of alcohol, they're going to close you and move your brand to one of their new places because honestly, you can't keep up. You're not efficient enough. And your flavors may suffer, but they can't afford to let you throw that much yield away. So traditional distilleries have always steered by yield. Breweries steer by flavor. So if you ask a brewer, hey man, that's a good beer. That IPA is really nice. You think you could get like 1% more alcohol? They'd say, well, yeah, it could, but then it wouldn't taste like that. You know, we just won a GABF silver for that. And we're not going to change the recipe just because we want more alcohol. They steer by flavor. So when Copperworks was founded by me and my business partner, Micah, whose birthday is today, by the way, we decided that we were going to steer by flavor. So we actually write on the top of all of our bottles, from great brewing comes great spirits. The whole concept is that it is the beer that gives the texture, the mouthfeel, those flavors that you may not be used to. And that is the differentiator from Scotch, Irish, Japanese malt whiskeys. Ooh, man, let's drink some more. Yes, Adam.
Yeah, I just had a question too. You mentioned there are about 2 weeks of conditioning after the fermentation. Can you say more about what's going on during that?
Yes, I can. And Adam, I'm going to get us into the Farmsmith, and then let's go back to your question about fermentation and conditioning, because conditioning is the last step of our fermentation process. So I want to be sure we talk about all of that. Okay,
Okay.
so Farmsmith, if everybody has that one, I have one of my little uh, caddies here. I had these caddies made. Can you see these things? Yeah, they hold Glencairn glasses, and they're copper. I should turn off my background thing. Anyway, they're pretty cool. Um, Farmsmith, unlike the Maltsmith, is a single farm, single variety, single harvest vintage barley. So we're treating grain like grapes. We're actually trying to tell what happens when you grow this variety of barley on the west side of the Cascades versus the east side of the Cascades. Is temperature and rainfall, does that matter the same variety? The answer is yes, but not as much as the variety matters. The variety matters even more. So this one, let's give that a little taste. That's different, isn't it? Man, I have to say, the finish on this one is one of my favorite. This is currently one of my favorite whiskeys that we make. The finish on that one, I just love it.
So if you're sticking to just a single varietal from a single farm, from a single vintage, how are you able to have this as your flagship? I mean, you got to have volume.
Great question. So we really only have one. I mentioned this. We really only have one whiskey that we're trying to be consistent in, and that whiskey is Maltsmith. The Farmsmith, we're going to tell you on the back of the bottle what each variety is, which farm it came from, and what its harvest year is. So that's what we used to do with every release. We did 50 releases that were to the general public that we would tell the story about all these different concepts we were playing with. And this is we're continuing that experiment. We're continuing that terroir, chasing terroir in whiskey. So it's not going to be consistent. As a matter of fact, we're down to 11 bottles of this release of Farmsmith. And then we come out with our next release of Farmsmith. Now, that is not single casks. So this one actually had 8 casks put together, whereas the Maltsmith had 21 casks that we blended together. We had to use a fermenter. It was such a big batch.
And how often do you come out with a new release, would you say?
Well, we it depends on how often you buy them. We come up with a new release. Let me back up a couple of sentences. We make new releases every year, but we don't package new releases until we have a demand for them. So one of the things that has happened in the whiskey industry is that we all produced like hell during COVID and after COVID, and we're expecting the growth to just never end. And of course it did, it slowed down. So we've got less production going on now than we used to have, but a lot of whiskey maturing and coming out. That answers your question. Thoughts on this whiskey? Let's hear. I see a few comments coming in to the chat. What are some other thoughts on here?
I'm really liking it as well. And I have some of the same comments as Jay. I was writing down. I get caramel and a lot more of kind of hay slash vegetable type. He put there hay grass, which yeah, that makes sense. And then I was writing down like some sort of cola flavor, and Jay puts down fizziness, which is kind of what I'm getting, like that cola with with some ice at the last few drops of that.
Yeah.
Really enjoying it. Less creamy than the first one. Um, and then the less sweet as well, but really lovely. And by the way, the note that I was talking about that reminded me of the Portland guys. I got to figure it out. For me, it's guava jam, which I love.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Well, at Adam's request, we're going to jump into some talk about fermentation and conditioning. So I'm going to talk about where some of those flavors may come from. But thank you for the notes, and Jay, good job on your comments there. Thank you for that. It's nice, by the way. Something that you probably all know is that it's hard to put words on aromas and flavors. It's hard because the part that use of the brain that we use to detect aromas and flavors is literally the oldest part of the brain, the lizard brain, if you would. But the part of language is the frontal lobes. Not only are they physically as far apart as they could be, but they're literally haven't been connected for anything other than the past 100,000 years, right? We're just really starting to get language and organoleptic together, and probably only of any seriousness in the past 300 or 400 years. So what I'm saying is that we're at a point where we have to practice tasting something, smelling it, and then listening to ourselves, but other people, and putting a word on it. And the more you do that consciously, not just passively, but the more you really try to do that, the better you'll get at it. And you'll get to the point where you can pick out little tiny nuances because you've done it so many times. So I encourage you to do two things. One is throw away your aroma wheel because it was made for a whiskey that you're not drinking today. Make your own, and it's for your nose and your palate. And two is to keep notes, keep records. The more notes you keep and the more records you keep, the better you'll get at developing your own vocabulary. Now, eventually you will be able to tie the word you use to a word some other people, Michael Jackson's Beer World Guide to Whiskey. And if he uses a word, you go, oh yeah, I know what he means when he says this. When he says waxy, I think, whatever, banana. And that's just one of those things you have to get used to. So some of the flavors, if I asked, remember that there's 4 ingredients in whiskey. One of them is in single malt whiskey. One of them is barley. One of them is yeast. One of them is water. And that's it. I said 4. One of them is a barrel, but I'm going to leave the barrel out for a minute. Well, no, let's put the barrel in. So you got the 4. 4 ingredients if you call a barrel an ingredient. What's the most important flavor? Important flavor contributor. Is it water? It's probably not
Yeast.
water, right? What did you say, Adam?
Yeast.
Yeah, it's yeast. Why is it yeast? So think about what yeast is doing. Yeast is eating a sugar that you've provided it, and it's transforming it into energy, and it's pooping out byproducts. CO2 is about half of that byproduct. Alcohol is about half, the other half, and then the little bit that's not those pure halves are conjugators. That's a little simple word for thingies, and it's just everything else that yeast makes. Those compounds, 800 of them, are where flavor comes from. It comes from yeast. Now we get to select in distillation the flavors we want to keep. We get rid of the flavors we don't want. And then we get to transform the flavors that we kept in a barrel. And we're going to get to that next hour about the transformation in a cask. But the most important thing is to understand that fermentation is where flavor comes from. If you eat barley, it does not taste very complex. If you mash barley and you get the sugars extracted and you convert them into a simple liquid that we call a wort, it doesn't taste very complex. But then you do a fermentation. And so you have lots of choices. What strain of yeast? What pH is the substrate that you're going to ferment in? What temperature? That's so incredibly important. And then how do you resolve the end of fermentation? Do you immediately put the finished or nearly finished beer or wash into the still? Or do you let all that yeast reabsorb compounds that it excreted, build up its cell walls, flocculate or sink to the bottom of the fermenter, and then you put bright beer, that is beer that doesn't have yeast, into the still? The last thing I just said about giving that conditioning time is what every brewer does before they can your beer. They don't can green beer. They let the yeast pull back in compounds that it has excreted during a rapid fermentation. It then builds up its cell walls, its mitochondria, and then it goes dormant. And when it goes dormant, it flocks or settles. You can expedite that by cooling it, and it'll flocculate down to the bottom. That takes time, and that time is something that most distillers don't have because they didn't boil during mashing or after mashing. So every brewer takes the grain, crushes it, extracts sugars. That liquid goes to a kettle. The kettle is where you boil it. By boiling it, you sanitize it. You kill wild yeast and bacteria. You give it a little bit of browning. It makes it a little bit darker. Caramelization may happen. And then you concentrate it. You drive off the water and you have more sugar per liter. Nobody does that in the traditional distilling. They didn't even know the role of yeast or bacteria when they started doing distillation. So everybody was doing spontaneous fermentation, taking whatever the native yeast was. They would come right out of the mash tun into the fermenter, let yeast do its work. The old word for that is God is good. And it would do a fermentation, turn into alcohol, and a joyous product arised. If they put that into a still, they could concentrate that alcohol, and that was how distilling was started. But brewers know that boiling sanitizes, purifies, and concentrates. And so we do that. And so we're able to use a pure strain of yeast, and we use a brewer's yeast. So brewer's yeast is famous for making beer flavors, floral notes, citrus notes, caramels, things that you want to taste in a beer. You counterbalance it with hops, but we don't add hops. But you get these flavors that the yeast makes, and it's temperature dependent. Each yeast strain has its temperature that it needs to hang out in. And if you get it too hot, it'll start making really weird off flavors, sulfites, and sometimes you might want that like in a weird Jamaican rum, but in Scotch and Irish and Japanese and bourbon whiskeys, you have to be careful about what strain you use and what temperature you put it in. And then the last thing that happens is if you put all of that yeasty wash into a kettle, like a pot still like we use, like the ones you see pictures behind me of ours, you're going to get autolyzation of that yeast. Is going to break up into the still, and it's going to taste like meat. And once that meaty flavor oxidizes in a barrel, it tastes like Play-Doh. It tastes like red colored Play-Doh. So I really am staunchly opposed to putting grain in yeast in pot stills and getting a whiskey out of that. Rate in a column still because resident time is minutes, not hours, but not in a pot still. So we don't do that. We give it those 2-week conditioning time. And during that 2-week conditioning time, that yeast is everything I mentioned to you, Adam. It pulls in those compounds that it had excreted during fermentation. It flocculates, and then we have clean beer to put into the still, to the wash still.
Can I ask a quick question on that? So fascinated, and thank you for the details on that. But if you don't boil it and leave it there, isn't that what some distillers do for a second fermentation with that bacteria? I think like springback, for example, because they want that funkiness. Is that when that happens?
Yes. So anytime you don't boil, so let's go all the way back to the very first step. You harvest grain out of the field, you malt it. The malting is going to transform a lot of the bacteria and the yeast and get rid of some of it, but not really. There's never a temperature that's so hot if you don't kiln it high. So if it's a pale malt, wild yeast and bacteria can still be on the grain. You take that grain, you put it in bags or silos or whatever. It sits there for days, weeks, months, even years, depending on when you get to it. You mash in with it. Mash in temperature can be low, 146 degrees Fahrenheit, 154 high. That doesn't kill yeast. That doesn't kill bacteria. As a matter of fact, it makes it a perfect environment for it to grow. You go all the way through, and the warmest you've ever gotten is 155, maybe 160 at what's called mash out. And then that goes into the fermenter. So everything that was stuck to the bag, stuck to the yeast and to the barley, and that was in the air is alive and working. So your choice is to overpitch a house strain of yeast and hope that it does most of the flavor development and fermentation before that bacteria has a chance to grow. And that usually works. It works really well. The great thing about it is its flavor is the yeast fermentation flavor, and then you get a sour note coming from the bacteria that comes later. Now, that bacteria has at first a great metabolic pathway of fermentation, so consuming sugars without using oxygen. Later, it goes into another pathway where it actually eats ethanol and turns it into acetic acid. So you end up with a tank of vinegar. If you're waiting long enough, that no longer is a fermented, it's now a sour. You lose alcohol yield. So that prevents you from having that 14-day lagering time or conditioning time. You have to get that stuff into the still, or it will lose its alcohol and just be great for fish and chips, but how much can we eat? So that's not a good process. And so everybody who's following a traditional process does get a little bit of souring. And it is part of the flavor, but it's not the only way to make a product. And as a matter of fact, if Louis Pasteur had been born 200 years before and had discovered fermentation and that heat kills wild yeast and bacteria, and that yeast does fermentation, I bet all brewers and distillers would have been following a boil method because they would have had a product that lasted longer and tasted better, both in beer and then be able to make whiskeys that way. But that just isn't what happened. And so we have great traditional products that have figured out a way to make really delicious drinks, but they're kind of singular in their focus. It's not, forget the fact that they've written rules around what they can do that has stifled creativity. They actually can't wait for things to mature. Because they don't mature, they transform into something else. Whew. Just a whole bunch of words here, but this all to say is we found a little hole in traditional whiskey that wasn't being solved, and we know we can't compete on yield, so we decided to steer by flavor. And that's just part of our story. And by the way, the most exciting part to me is that more and more brewers are becoming American single malt whiskey distillers. And what that's going to mean is that we're going to end up with a whole bunch of interesting whiskeys. And it's from the brains of brewers, not from a traditional process that granddad did. I do want to move on and keep tasting. We're going to keep jumping into these soapbox dialogues, but I figure we might as well move along. Let's go over to the Peatsmith. So the Peatsmith is a peated version of the Farmsmith. Now, it is a single farm, single variety, single vintage barley, but it's been kilned with peat from Shelton, Washington. So who knew Washington State has about 480 peat bogs, and 3 of them are commercially mined, and 1 of them tastes good, and that's this one. So let's give that one a pour. Let's see, I gotta find my Peatsmith. Here it is. And I'm real interested to hear your thoughts on this one.
I added a bottle of this for one of my club shipments last year because I hadn't had a chance to try it. I got a number 42 back when they first came out.
All right. Yeah,
Was
that's nice.
probably, that's my holy grail favorite bottle ever that you guys have put out. And I like the Peatsmith, but it's not a number 42. But
Right.
I like that the peat is super gentle, but it's there.
Yeah.
And it has that campfire note to it. It's
Campfire.
it's so
Perfect
pleasant.
word.
Yeah, it's just so pleasant because it's not super challenging. I have friends that just, they're not even peat adjacent.
Right.
They have actually liked this bottle.
Well, that we have some interesting things. We have turned on some people from who didn't think they liked gin, who didn't think they like vodka, who didn't think they like whiskey, whoever they are, because we're making everything from a beer with no hops, and that just totally transforms every other part of it. And they're like, I always thought a gin tasted like, pine forest. It's like, well, it doesn't have to. Or that whiskey always tasted like, a bourbon or a scotch, and well, it doesn't have to. So thank you for letting me know about that. Um, let's let's hear about some tasting notes. Do we have some notes in the comments here? Yeah.
Well, if nobody else is going to say anything, I find there's a little hint of cola right off the very top of the palate that's immediately switched to the campfire note of the peat. But that sweetness kind of follows through, and the palate lingers quite a bit, even with the sweetness. So it's really kind of interesting.
So it is I mean, it's pretty fair to say that it's subtle compared to an Islay Scotch, right? It reminds me, Belvany sometimes does where they'll put one of their double oaks in a used Lefroy cask or something, and they'll leave it in for 2 weeks and then pull that out, and that's that little bit of smoke in the back. But that always tastes to me very traditional, phenolic, Band-Aid, hospital floor, creosote. Those Scottish peats are made from a completely different organic material than what Washington State has. So this isn't sphagnum moss. This is mostly tea myrtle, which is a little shrub. And so the process of it turning into peat, which takes about 10,000 years, still left sticks the size of my pinky in it. And so it's when you burn it, it actually is more like a driftwood fire smoke than like something you'd get from Scotland that was all moss with high phenols. I actually really love it at this level. The next batch of Peatsmith is a little bit higher. So every year we were working with Skagit Valley Malting. They have 20,000 pound drum roasters. They've since closed, but we would put 20,000 pounds in and get 16,000 pounds out. And so one batch would get us 3 fermentations. We're about 5,000 pounds per ferment, 5,400 pounds per batch. And we do this every year. And each year they would experiment with the amount of smoke, and they had a different apparatus and different process, and it would change the amount of smoke. And sometimes it got a little bit too high. It started tasting like cigarette ash instead of like a flavor component, like a smoked fire. They went out of business a couple of years ago and are trying to rise from the ashes, but so far haven't managed to do so. And about that same time, we made a decision that peat, as delicious as it is, as fun as it is one of the best ways to sequester carbon and one of the best ways to protect wetlands. So digging it up and burning it is actually a really environmentally bad practice. So we've decided to move away from doing peat. Now let's think about, you remember me saying this has a smoky kind of fire? Well, another product that Washington has a lot of is fruit trees. We have apple trees, apricot, cherry trees. Those are always being pulled out and replaced with newer varieties. Newer fields are going in, old trees are pulled out, and they slash burn those trees and don't have any controls on the smoke. We thought, what if we took that, pelletized some of that wood, and used that wood to smoke the malt? Since this is kind of a smoke flavor anyway, that way we're actually preserving the Washington concept that we've always been working on, but we're not pulling peat out of the ground. So we still have about 5 more years of peat to release because we've been putting it up for about 7 years. But this is not going to be something that Copperworks does in perpetuity. We'll be moving more to fruitwood smoked barley. Does everybody understand what peat is? If I say, what's peat? You know how it's made, how it comes to be. Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. We good? Not sure. Yeah. Okay. Um, let's let's keep drinking. We got some good comments on that one. But I do want to move on. What did I tell you was the next one? Did
You
I
said we're gonna do the what
11
I
year
thought
old.
was the Pierre de Resistance 11-year-old cask number two was gonna
great. Let's do it.
on this peat one, and I might be going crazy. I taste very little peat on this, and that's one of the reasons I fell in love with your peat
Totally.
expressions. For
Totally.
me, it was more the beginning of the palate was like smoked meats, like a salty, meaty, like a prosciutto, and
Yeah.
then mid to finish was like like the sweetness and bitterness of an Amaro, like
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Amaro
Mm-hmm.
Nonino.
Mm-hmm.
Sipping it on its own had I think for me the
Yep.
peat kind of turned into a smoke, into a bitterness a little bit,
Yeah, I
and then
agree.
like and then like a fruity sweet finish at the end. It was very interesting, very complex, and again, as a non-huge, not a huge peat fan, this was a fantastic pour.
Well, it has been a good segue into people to say, what we hear a lot. I don't like whiskey, but I like bourbon, and that's because they don't really understand the words they're using. And I say, oh, so you don't like Scotch? No, I hate it. Why? Oh, it all tastes like telephone poles. I was like, it actually doesn't. About 80% of it doesn't, but you haven't tasted those yet. But I want you to try this one. And they're like, hey, you know what? You just converted me. That is a smoky flavor. It's not a, creosote or phenolic flavor. Okay, we're going to jump into the 11-year-old cask number two. And thank you for reposting that, Jane.
So being a single cask and being one of your oldest, I can't imagine there was a lot of bottled out of this cask.
Yeah, I think we had 179.
That's
Uh,
quite a bit. Was it a sherry cask? I mean, that's it's pretty
Nope,
dark.
nope, nope. It was a 53 gallon, but it was at oh gosh, 143 proof, and we proofed it down to 100. So yeah,
Oh, gotcha. And of course your climate's pretty moist, so you're not.
yeah. Although we're in condition warehousing, we're going to talk about barrel program here in a minute.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I want to do everything, give you a chance to taste a little bit, and then we'll get back to that. So so when we first started, we had fewer things to choose from. So we didn't have single farm, single variety, single vintage barleys. Why? Because we had the farms, we didn't have the malt houses. So in order for any of that stuff to happen, we had to have small malt houses who could take small farm production and keep it separate from everything else that was going on. The only barley that we had available that had a standard of identity of being grown in Washington was Great Western Malting, and they had one they called Washington Select. They knew it came from farms in Washington, but they were not paying attention to how many pounds came from this farm and that farm, what variety it was. They were going all on specs. What's the protein levels, the beta glucans, the color. It was all about specs. They would blend to be consistent. Nobody was blending for flavor. So we ended up getting that for the first couple of years. And that's what this is. This is made out of Great Western Maltings, Washington Select two-row pale malt. We put it into Independent Stave Company, yeah, Independent Stave Company with a 40-minute toast and a number three char. And we left it in for 11 years. And we entered it into the barrel at 115 proof. And like I said, it came out at 143. And then we proofed it down to 100 proof. But I want to talk about what you're getting out of that.
I was getting more density on the fruit, a lot of like caramelized like peaches, apricots, things like that, and then some cinnamon.
That cinnamon, of course, that strong oak in there. Yeah, after 11 years in a number three char. How about I've read in several of the other ones I've read peppermint, mint, cooling, menthol, etc. I actually get that in here as well. What I don't get, but that I have heard in some of these other ones, is a little bit of uh, a pininess. And that is because we were, for the first 6 or 7 years, we were literally using beer yeast from the cone of a fermenter that had been at one of our partner breweries. I'm going to talk about our brewing process in just a second. And so it had yeast that had been in a hopped beer. And if that beer was particularly hoppy, then that flavor, that little bit of hop oil that was stuck to the yeast would come all the way through distillation and barrel aging. And so we had for a long time, Jim Murray would always say, it tastes like they've, distilled in a gin still. And I was like, no, 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 you don't understand. That's the yeast coming through. And that was another reason that long conditioning was really helpful to us, because it let that yeast flock out and it got rid of a lot of um, that hop flavor that was coming through. Well, now we've been using yeast that had never been, it's brewer's yeast, but it's never been fermented with hops. So it's our own yeast. So we don't have that problem of carrying forward hop oil. But for the first 6 or 7 years, that's what we did.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
tasted the one of your single cask releases with Vadim that had that flavor, and it
Yep.
almost reminded me of something. There are some like Japanese whiskeys that use IPA casks and things, and it got some of that impression.
Right. Right. I mean, I'm not, I want to be able to control it. So I want to be able to have it there if I want it and get rid of it if I don't want it. And the problem that we had with the
Hmm.
process we were doing before is that it seemed like it was out of our control. I mean, it took us 5 years to even recognize where it was coming from. Honestly, because whiskey was maturing, and then when it come out, we're like, well, yeah, where's that coming from? And then we realized, oh yeah, of course, that's hop oil. And the way we knew that is I had tasted whiskeys that uh, Bell, the guy from uh, well, he used to be in Kentucky, now he's in Tennessee. What am I saying? Corsair, Derek Bell had, done every crazy thing that you can do in fermentation and distillation. He wrote the book called Alt Whiskey. And I always thank him and say, thank you for doing those things so I don't have to. Because some of them I know I don't want to do, but I wouldn't have known if I hadn't tasted what you did. And he's like, took one for the team on that one. But he makes some great whiskeys too. Triple smoke is one of my favorites. But I identified that flavor as coming from hopped beer. And I thought, even though we're not hopped, we do have yeast with hop oil in it. So we always knew what ferment that yeast strain had come from, and the ones that had a higher hop content led to more flavors 3 to 5 years later. Other thoughts on cast number two?
I get the cinnamon that had been mentioned. I also get like a vanilla wafer, and then there's a herbal note there, like rosemary or maybe oregano, but more like rosemary. Yeah, very very complex. It just keeps changing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's by the way, thank you for mentioning the changing. One of the things that we all know is that in Scotch you can drop a couple of drops of water in bourbon, you drop a couple of drops of water. It opens up the surface there so you can smell more, you get to taste a little bit more. But we have this experience where I will actually game it now, where when you pour something into a glass, for the first 15 minutes, it changes so fast that I actually pour two glasses. And the first glass I enjoy while the second one just sits there And by the time I'm starting the second glass, it's reached this point that the first glass never even hit. And so, I'll split my dram in half and put it in two glasses. And I've just learned Copperworks has this experience that I don't know the science behind that, but I'm enjoying the hell out of it. It is something I have to work around. It's not the same as like proofing down or breaking the surface with water. It's really a complex, strange phenomenon, but it changes. And so when we do taste panel on everything, which we do weekly, we'll come through and taste the whiskey first, get impressions, and then come back and taste it again. Now we also dilute with water to get it down to drinking strength because they're all like cask strength when we're starting. Great. Well, I'm glad you got a chance to taste that one. There aren't many bottles of it. And we did it really because as we meant to make it a 10-year-old whiskey, and we just never got around to celebrating our 10-year birthday. And so the next thing you know, it's like, crap, is actually 11 years and 9 months, right? So we almost hit 12 years. We're like, no, we need to get this stuff out. And so we made it an 11-year whiskey. Um, and I'm quite happy with it, but I'm not as impressed with it as I am with some of the stuff we've made since that have much more interesting grain, in my opinion, much more interesting recipes. I just like what we've been able to do, but I'm always enjoying going back and tasting some of the first stuff that we made. So that is this one. Are we ready to go to the next one? I'm gonna have to go back to Lori's notes there. Okay, so we said the red wine cask. So now we're going to get into two cask finishes. We call it a red wine cask because we don't quite know what the wine was. So let me tell you, I bought two casks from East Coast Barrel Company labeled as Madeira. They came in, they didn't smell like Madeira, but they look like red wine because the side of the French oak barrel had all the red wine stains on it. It's like, what does this smell like? And we're naming a Burgundy or whatever. And so we ended up just filling them up with whiskey and waiting and waiting and waiting. And it was one of those things where it's like, God, is this stuff ever going to transform into something interesting? And it did, but boy, it took it a long time, couple of years in that cask. And then we actually really liked it, but we were never able to figure out the pedigree. So we just simply called it red wine cask because we knew that was true. You could look at the cask and tell it, but we didn't know anything else about it. I didn't believe that it was a Madeira cask, and I still don't. But I like how you can immediately smell that French oak, that dry, almost sweat type of aroma that comes out.
I always associate that French oak smell kind of with Madeira. So to me, it smells a bit like Madeira.
Yeah.
So I could believe maybe at least one of the casks had Madeira in it. I'd like to think so.
Jane, they both could have been.
Yeah.
I just didn't trust the system enough to say for sure that's what they were.
Mhm.
So I didn't want to go on record as claiming that.
No, that makes
And
perfect
we are
sense.
trying to be as transparent and honest as we can in our stuff. So I don't know if any of you have ever had a chance to go, but if you go to Copperworks Distilling, you go to whiskeys, and then you go to past releases or archive or something, you'll find all the different whiskeys that we've released. And if you click on the little tiny link that says specs, you'll get a 3 to 5 page PDF, and it's of every brew, every fermentation, every distillation, both wash and spirit, every barrel, which cooperage, what entry proof, how many we picked, how long they were aged, what we blended together. So it's just like nerdy as hell and yeah, it takes a lot of work to compile, but a lot of people have enjoyed the fact that that is out there for them. So we are trying to be uber transparent, just like to a T. Again, bottled at 100 proof. That just seems to be a really good, consistent way to put Copperworks in a bottle so that you can drink it straight and add water and it's still legally whiskey. Technically, once it goes below 80 proof, it isn't. So that's part of it. And I think that that adds to the finish.
I know the first time I tried this, I got a nuttiness on it that I absolutely loved. Jane was nice enough to share her bottle, and I remember she was saying that it's a whiskey club exclusive. So we may
Yeah.
have cheated the system a little bit, and I had her order a couple of bottles for me. So sorry about that.
Well, the reason I ship those out to you is because I am proud of what we're doing in the Whiskey Club. We are putting honestly some of our most interesting things through that method. And so I did want to do a shameless plug and say we got a whiskey club, and that's where the really cool stuff's coming out. So thank you for
Well worth
letting
it.
for teeing me
I
up for
highly
that.
recommend the club. I highly recommend it.
One interesting thing about it, I won't advertise for too long, is that not only do we, let you opt out and there's no cost to join, but more interestingly, is you get 25% off for 30 days. You get 25% off anything. So anything you order, including everything we've tasted in our catalog, is 25% off in that first order. So that's kind of that pays for itself, even if you do accept all of the models that we're releasing every quarter. Okay. Let's see. I'm getting some good notes in here. Thank you for writing those. Let's talk about it for a little bit. Love the grapes, berry fruit, jabbing. Yep. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Cask finished whiskey has all sorts of end points. Sherry is the classic. I have released lots and lots of sherry cask whiskey, and we're going to taste the weirdest one I've ever done here in a minute. But I will say that sherry casks, I'm tired of them. They're delicious, but Washington State has 1,100 active wineries, 1,500 wineries that are licensed. We're starting to explore local wine. So we're leaving behind purchased barrels and we're doing trades with wineries that are in our Washington region. So watch this space for some other interesting things coming out. Can you, even though you're picking up some of the casks contributions, can you still tell that it's a Copperworks product? Does it still have some of the standards there?
I can
I think so.
definitely tell that it's from you guys. You have this really nice note that's very consistent across your line.
And that's that beer note, Jane. That process of fermenting without consuming all the sugars and then doing the distilling of the traditional pot stills, but using American oak, both new and used. So we're Kristen Krogstad from House Spirits now, Westward, uses the same line, but we make a wash like a brewery, we distill like a scotch, and we barrel like a bourbon. So we're stealing ideas from all the industries, but in fact, none of those are true statements. They're all modified from each of those industries.
I'm very much liking this one. This one's really nice.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, Jay, thank you for that. They're all creamy, and that base note is the Copperworks note, and that is that unfermented sugar that came through in fermentation that didn't get fermented and makes it through distillation. Yeah, I'm gonna keep that one in the glass. I've been mixing all the other ones in here, but let's keep going. I think our next product is going to be the Amaro Cask. So brace yourself for this one. This one has a pretty serious finish to it.
Considering that every Amaro I've ever had has been either dark red or darker than that, this is a pretty light pour.
Yes, it is. Every Amaro has different botanicals. Gentian is the name number one that gives it the bitterness. But then all the other botanicals in there, some of them are very, very dark. Skip's is not. Skip Tonetti, who makes letterpress distilling and made this Amaro and then puts it into a um, Copperworks cask. It isn't a dark Amaro. So it ends up with a lighter color when it comes out.
There's definitely bitterness on the nose. It's so interesting.
I'm going to grab his bottle. I'll show you.
It's like a cocktail in a bottle. You wouldn't need anything but maybe drop it on a cube.
Yep.
What's interesting is that this is one of those where nosing it at the bottom of the glass is totally different than nosing it at the top of the glass.
True that. Yeah. Yeah, the amount of menthol and that you get from the bottom of the glass is not quite overwhelming, but it's pretty strong. So this is the second time we've done whiskey in an Amaro cask, and we've also done gin in letterpresses Amaro cask. We've done some local distilleries, Sons of Vancouver, and I call them local. They're Vancouver, BC. We've done some fun products with them. They make an amaretto, and we've done products there. We've probably done about 35 gin finished uh, cask finished gins. You know, port, rum, mezcal, Calvados, Oloroso sherry, Pedro Jimenez sherry, all sorts of crazy things. Even a chai cider barrel that a cider company used, a bourbon barrel, and then put a chai cider in it, and then we put a gin in it. That was one of my favorite gins ever. But we've done tequila, mezcal, port, and rum. I'll say that the Amaro is one of our favorites. That and a tequila tonic. That's also one of our favorites.
I'm in.
So yeah, this one, it actually makes a really interesting old fashioned. It's a fun sipping whiskey, but it already is sort of a cocktail in a bottle. So it's got such strong finishes to it that you don't need a whole bunch more um, modifiers to it to make it into a cocktail. So sometimes I just stir it up with ice, put a couple of dashes of bitters in it, and I'm like kind of like a Manhattan with no vermouth.
I don't know what I was expecting. I was not expecting that. That's definitely polarizing. It's interesting. Glad we did it towards the end. That's
Yep.
interesting.
Yep, that leaves a pretty big flavor impact on there. So yeah. Um, let's go. Any other points on this one? I want to make sure we have time to talk about all sorts of stuff, and but I do want to keep moving because we got a couple of more interesting ones to go. What is it, 8:19? Yeah, we got some time. Anybody need a water break? Are you all drinking a little bit of water in between here? Smart. Good deal. All right. Me too. Um, the next one is a single cask, and I think is that the craft malt month? I believe it is cask 484.
Yep, it was the 2025 malt month. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm the chair of the membership committee, and I've been on the Craft Maltsters Guild board for about 7 years. And um, and by the way, we're struggling because everybody is slowing down. Beverage alcohol is slowing down. So brewers aren't buying as much, and neither are distillers. So the one of the things that we do as a fundraiser and for awareness is we have what we call Craft Malt Month. To be a craft malt certified producer, you only need to use 10% of craft malt. Craft malt, sort of like craft beer, has to be 75% owned by local, can't be big brand, has to be sourced within 500 miles of your malt house. So the barley can't come from, across country or across the world. Your batch sizes or your total production has to be small. So again, just kind of using some of those numbers, it's 110 tons. So it's not that different than craft beer has its own parameters of how your ownership is and where your size. What's interesting about it is that that's where local farms get to shine. That's where local ingredients get to get used. And that's where the money stays in a circular economy and helps grow the grain shed of wherever that's coming from. So I'm a big proponent of that, not just because of the interesting flavors and the terroir that comes from it, but literally because it is making people aware of the fact that beer is made of barley and whiskey, malt whiskey, is made of barley. And if you talk to a lot of your friends who aren't on this call, aren't as interested in whiskey as you are, they don't actually know what the ingredients are, and they get confused on the words, and that's normal. So by having a malt month gives us a chance to tell that story. Well, what we did is every year for the past 3 or 4 years, we've made a special selection and we donate $10 for every bottle we sell. We donate to the Craft Maltsters Guild. And this is this year's Craft Malt Month release. It is a single farm, single variety, single vintage. It's also salmon safe certified. And it's the Baroness. So Baroness is one of my favorite barleys. It's grown in Colfax, Washington, on Bill Meyer's farm. He and his $4 and wife manage this farm. They call it Joseph's Granary. And this was harvested in let's see, 2020, brewed in 2021 and distilled, and then was aged for 4 years and 9 months in a Kelvin cooperage, my favorite cooperage of all the cooperages we do, Kelvin cooperage number 3 char. So we do for all of our products, we do a long toast, a minimum of 24 months of seasoning, that is drying without a kiln, but now we've moved to 36 months. So a long toast after the drying, the seasoning, and then we do a light char, usually a number 2, but sometimes a number 3. Thoughts on this one?
This has got such a wonderful flavor. It's almost like biscuit with some British baking spice. Kind of think like Christmas spice pudding, something like that. Not quite Christmas. It doesn't have that fruity aspect like the other one did. But
yeah,
my God, it's just amazing.
And by the way, Jane, that fruitiness will come out if you lower the proof. So we're at, let's see if I remember correctly, we're at 125.9 proof. Yep. So you're going to need to add not drops of water, but full squirts of water into your dram glass. Bring it to 100 proof and be able to do a side-by-side comparison of what it tastes like at 100 proof compared to all the other ones you've done. I encourage you to do that. As a matter of fact, this is going to sound like blasphemy, but I encourage you guys, when you open up a bottle of whiskey that you're intrigued by, let's just call it waste, destroy half ounce of it by adding water, tasting it, nosing it, adding more water, tasting it, nosing it, adding more water. Get it down to the point to where it's about 20 proof or 40 proof, 20% alcohol. What you're going to taste at that point is flavored water. You're going to be able to taste grain. You're going to be able to taste barrel. You're going to be able to taste yeast. You're not going to taste a complex whiskey, but you'll be able to taste the ingredients that made that whiskey. And that, by the way, is the proof that master nosers nose at. They are called master nosers, not master tasters, because they don't taste whiskey to blend. They nose whiskey. And if they nose whiskey above about 40 proof, they're going to anesthetize their nose. They're going to be good for 15 minutes of the day. But if they keep it, the lab gets it all down to 40 proof, they can make decisions on what whiskey goes into what blend or becomes a single cask all day long. Well, that's a stretch, but several hours of the day by just smelling it. And that's an acquired skill, and I'm hoping that all of you guys acquire that, and I can send you barrels of whiskey to blend.
Did you mention the barrel entry proof on this one?
I didn't, and I think we've been since about. I'm gonna guess that it's 115 proof. And the reason I say guess is because I don't actually have the specs of that in front of me right now. But I think that's about what we've been entering for the past 4 or 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. We sometimes now will enter in a little bit higher, a little bit lower. Oftentimes, what we do is on the first entry into a brand new charred American oak barrel, we'll enter in at, say, 115. And 4 or 5 years later, we will dump that barrel and put new make whiskey in it, and we'll enter that in somewhere around 117 to 120. So it penetrates the wood a little bit more, picks up that old whiskey, displaces that into the volume, and that gives us a little second life out of that whiskey. And that'll usually stay in, 2 to 4 years longer than the first use.
It seems like the texture, it reminds me of things that have a little bit lower barrel entry proof, just that kind of creamy texture. You don't
Yeah.
get a lot of tannin, and it's nice.
Well, it's one of the things that I wish you could have tasted all of these whiskeys at cask strength. And remember that some of them are blends of numerous casks. But it is one of the pleasures of my job is being able to taste cask strength of these whiskeys. And they often taste like this with that unctuous kind of brown depth to it that, then as you add water, that's when you start getting the fruit, or that's when you start getting the florals or the caramels. But at first, it's just this big ball of like finishes that just keep adding on tobacco wrapper and leather and biscuit. And I'm really happy with those flavors.
So if it's entry level 115, so alcohol is going up, which is counterintuitive with the humidity, but you mentioned controlled warehouses. That's what
Yeah,
that
great. Actually, almost all American whiskey goes up. So in Scotland, they have super high humidity when their warehouses are right next to the ocean, and so their humidity in a rick house might be 80%. So they're definitely preferentially losing the larger molecule alcohol than the smaller molecule water. And that's because things like to go from where there's more to where there's less. But there's so much water out there that it's really not happening as much. Whereas in, Kentucky and Tennessee, yes, it's humid, and sometimes it's ridiculously humid, like 90% humidity. But a good deal of the year, it's super cold and dry and crisp, and humidity might be in the teens to 20s. So that's what we actually are feeling here. But we keep our warehouse at 70 degrees Fahrenheit year round. So we're not getting changes. We're not encouraging the whiskey to go in and out of the wood because we're going to over oak. So I'm going to get into a philosophy of flavor on barrels in just a second. Instead, what we're doing is we're optimizing for the third thing that happens in a barrel. It's not the removal through the char, it's not the addition of vanillas and caramels that happens when things move through the wood. It's actually the oxidation and esterification process. As you probably know, the wood itself is not porous, but all of those seams where the staves join, the chime where the heads go in, all of that is leaking vapor in and out. And one of the things that we're getting in our warehouse is about a 7% angel share year one. So some of that is absorption into the wood. And then every subsequent year, about 5%. So our angel share is twice that of what you would see in a traditional dunnage warehouse in Scotland or a bourbon rickhouse. And why is that? Partly due to the fact that it's warm and we have 840 cubic feet of air a minute moving across all those barrels. So we're not building up that blanket of alcohol around the barrel that makes it smell so good when you walk into a warehouse. You're like, man, I'm just breathing whiskey and wood. Man, I love this. Ours smells like not much. It smells like fresh air. And all that is leaving the surface of the barrel, leaving room for more transformations to happen. Well, here's what happens. Alcohol vapor comes out, water vapor comes out. In our case, preferentially water vapor. Our humidity goes from about 65% in the summer down to about 30% in the winter. We don't manage humidity. We only manage temperature. What we end up with is oxygen air, I should say, going back into the barrel. So if something leaves, something comes back in. Air has oxygen. Oxygen oxidizes, that is, breaks down compounds in there that we've extracted. Aldehydes are one of the major chemical components of new make whiskey. And aldehydes oxidize into an acid. And when an acid and an alcohol bump into each other and stick, they call that an ester. And the esters that are formed in whiskey are like dried fruit, leather, tobacco, chocolate nibs, old books, all these things we've been talking about, mature whiskey flavors. They're not just the things that we collected from the still. They're a transformation that happens inside the barrel, and it's dependent on proof, alcohol, and temperature, and mainly temperature. Every 10 degrees centigrade you drop below room temperature, that esterification cuts in half. So here's a little secret. That's not really a secret, but it's not talked about much. Most of the world's whiskeys aren't maturing when they're in the middle of the winter. Or actually, it's like halfway through the winter to the middle of the summer. When there's cold, that joining of acids and alcohols is not happening. What's happening is absorption of oxygen, but the maturing process slows down. The good news is, like in Kentucky, it gets really hot. And so in the summer and late summer and early winter, all that whiskey is still warm. All that process of maturing of esterification happens. We just keep it warm year round. We're not looking for the removal because we boil to sanitize, so we don't have sour flavors that we're trying to work through that heavy char inside the barrel. We don't need any more sweetness from the barrel like caramels and vanillas. Those are frankly very simple sweet flavors, wood sugars. We're looking for the sugar that was unfermented from that beer. And that's a much more complex and interesting sugar flavor than just barrel flavor. So our whole process is literally predicated on the fact that we start with a beer that leftover residual sugars, and then everything else had to change from there. We can't over oak it by letting it go through a whole bunch of temperature changes. Instead, we keep that right so that the oxidation is the thing that happens the most. Our whiskeys are getting about 2 to 3 times the oxidation that a Scotch or a Kentucky whiskey would get, but about a third the removal and addition. So the barrel flavoring is slowed down without those changes. That's one of the reasons why we use our barrels twice. The first time we use them, and we actually have to pull the whiskey out before it over oaks. The second time we put whiskey in, we've gotten rid of some of the caramels so that we can leave it in a little bit longer, have a little bit more of that esterification. That's just all part of the science.
Awesome. Thank you.
Let's see, what other notes have we got in here? Don't forget the salmon. Oh, yeah. Butterfinger, yeah. I love your comments. Thank you. Yeah, Jay mentioned about Indian whiskey, and also if you've ever had Kavalan Taiwanese whiskey, one of the most extraordinary whiskeys in the world. Um, they're very secretive about how long they mature their whiskey, but I was fortunate enough to have one of their cellarmen come visit Copperworks and told me that a lot of their whiskey is barreled at 18 months, and most of it is barreled by 24 months. So that is whiskey that is jet black, and yet honestly, it's a completely different whiskey. It's not that it's the same thing as a whiskey that's been aged 10 years in Scotland. It's not. It's a different flavor. And that's what's also fun about coming up with ways and processes that are regional, grains that are regional, yeast that is regional, barrels that are regional. Everything has a process. And one of the things that we're excited about is brewers becoming distillers are making whiskey that really hasn't been made. It's a process that isn't a traditional process. And most of the whiskey that's being made is following a traditional process. Okay. Are we ready for the color cask?
For me, what's funny on the nose on this one, after a while, all I smelled was like those bottled Starbucks Frappuccinos? Like a
I don't.
mocha and cream and
Okay.
coffee at the same time and kind of a little
Uh-huh.
sweet. Like that was it was creamy and chocolatey and coffee. It was like a latte on the nose. It was really interesting. But the palate just develops and develops and develops. And it's so interesting how this barrel is so different from the other single barrel cask strength that we tasted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is your case study. And by the way, exactly, that is a case study. That is one of the reasons that we use the Baroness every year. And by the way, remember that it's from the same farm, it's the same variety, but it's a different harvest year. Now, I'm not going to attribute every single change in flavor to the harvest year. There's all sorts of other things that change flavor. And, as try as we might to keep everything consistent. But I love how the Baroness always produces a delicious flavor, yet it's always different. Each harvest year, we get a new flavor. I'll tell you a story about Baroness if we have time, but I want to make sure that we get in. I think we're going to have some questions about this color cask. So I think it'd be fun to get into this one.
Well,
Yeah.
as we pour this color cask, we do have a tradition here in the Virtual Tasting Society. Is I invite everyone to turn on their cameras for just a second and join us for a raise a glass and a cheers. I'm gonna sip that. There we go. Luke, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Cheers, you guys. Thank you. Thanks for participating.
Awesome. Well, give me 1 second. I'm gonna pull up my camera equipment. 1 second, raise a glass and smile to the camera.
All right. Get those logos going.
Got it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jason, for making this possible. And thank you
You
for
bet.
everyone for joining us tonight. I know
Yeah,
we're gonna
thank
have quite
you.
a few people watching the recording later on our YouTube channel, but everyone who's here for the live, thank you, thank you, thank you. Your questions are invaluable, and we love sharing the nerdy. I'm getting a lot of positive feedback in the background as well. So,
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about what a color cask is. But first let's just go ahead and dive in. It's just a friggin' crazy thing.
It's it's too much to type. It tastes like if coffee liqueur was aged in PX casks.
That's a good one. There you
I,
go.
I, I love it. I love it. But that was my like first impression.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The coffee
A very
liqueur
wet
is
PX
so
cast.
true. What was that, Adam?
It tastes like something in a very wet PX cask.
Yeah, it's
Very good, like dried fruit, coffee, chocolate, maple.
so let's talk just a little bit about sherry. By the way, how many of you, by raise of hand, how many of you enjoy just drinking sherry? Great. It's good to see. Drink more sherry. The more sherry you drink, the more sherry casks we'll have in the world. So sherry is a delicious traditional product. Sadly, a lot of people are no longer drinking sherry. Um, and so what's being done to salvage the distilling industry is that casks are being sherried. What that means is a brand new cask is made. Sherry is put into that cask for 2, 3 years, and that sherry flavors the cask, and then that cask is sold. And that usually goes to, Macallan's or Westland or anybody who needs a lot of sherry casks. And those casks have great flavors of sherry, but it's not the same as a cask that actually held sherry wine for 40, 80, 100, 200 years. So jump into sherry. There's two types of sherry, oxidative and biological. I'm not going to drain the science on this, but let me say that when you look at a Pedro Jimenez sherry and you see the brown, that is oxidation. When you look at a Oloroso sherry and you see less brown, that is oxidation. Oxidation is causing that darkness. Well, one of the reasons that the same reason that Scotland started adding caramel sugar to whiskey to make it look darker is the same reason that the Spanish were adding color sherry to Oloroso is to make it look darker. They wanted it to look older, to look, I don't know, more unctuous, more oxidized. So they made a type of sherry in which they left the skins on, and they called it a color sherry or black sherry. And the only purpose of it was to color Oloroso sherry, to make it look darker. But they weren't going to sell it and they weren't going to drink it. Over the years, they quit doing that. And they got to the point where they dumped out their color casks. And one of the bodegas that I visited 10 or 11 years ago was called Oguso. And they had 6 of these casks. And they dumped them all. And they sold 5 of them to Macallan. And they gave the barrel broker 1 to do something else with. And he gave it to Copperworks. So it was 2018, I think. And we had just won Distillery of the Year from ADI. And they just thought that would be so fun if we put new make whiskey in there and let it fully mature. So this isn't finished. This isn't whiskey that we aged in American oak for 5 years and then put into a sherry cask. This is whiskey that came off the still, and it was actually what we call a Queen's Run. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And then we filled that 139 liter or 639 liter cask with new make whiskey and left it in for a little over 5 years. And this is what came out. This cask was 200 years old. Their best estimate is that the wooden cask was 200 years old, and it had been processing color whiskey, sherry, all of that time through multiple processes. So when we got it, we didn't really know what to think, but we knew it was special and we knew it would be fun. You remember me saying that I had a guy visit from Cavalon, and he was a master blender at Cavalon, and he was opening up a Japanese whiskey distillery, and I think they're still in the process of building it, a huge plant they were going to build. And he tasted this and he says, you got to pull it out right now. This is perfect. You do not want to let this go anymore. If you let it go anymore, it's going to totally over oak to the point where it's no good. But right now, he actually thought it was our best whiskey. I was like, well, you're from Cavalon and I understand your flavor profile, and I love their products, but I did take heed and we emptied that barrel in the next 5 days. And so we got this flavor, and then we had to decide what to do with it. And what we knew is that this would never happen again. Nobody is making this anymore. Nobody would be dumb enough to release it because it was like this crazy flavor, crazy experiment. But we're like, nope, we're really proud of this. We love it, and we think it's going to be iconoclastic, and it is. So we put a high price tag, $149 on it. We put it out into the market, and it's sold very well. But it was doing fine, and then it exploded one morning. And I came to the distillery, and we had sold 50 bottles that morning. And I was like, what happened? And the Whiskey Tribe, which is a Texas group, had done a 17-minute video, which is hilarious. And I really encourage you to spend 17 minutes of your life watching that video, because now that you've tasted this whiskey, you're going to enjoy the heck out of it. I will say they pan it and like it both at the same time. They're like, what is this? But the same impression you might have gotten is like, I'm not even sure this is a whiskey. Is this a whiskey? It's too dark. It just is absolutely crazy. So this is from a 200-year-old whiskey cask, or sherry cask, and it is a Queen's Run. A Queen's Run is where we make a whiskey entirely from the faints. So every distillation we collect heads, hearts, and tails. The heads and tails become the faints for the next batch, which we recycle, and we always get a lot of flavor from those, but we still make tight head cuts. We make a 147 to 121 proof head cut, heart cut. And so as we collected those faints, we redistilled and made a whiskey entirely from that. Again, making those same cuts, but now it has a lot more flavor. And that's what we put into this cask. So it was sort of our most flavorful whiskey going into the most flavorful barrel, and then left it in for 5.5 years.
This is so interesting. And by the way, coincidences, I just happened to put it in a Whiskey Tribe Bastard's Ball. Thank you, because I'm like an hour away from those guys. I go there all the time.
That's so great. That is so great. Well, it's been really fun being in the industry and being able to play around and having honestly, I feel like what Copperworks has done is open the door for brewers to experiment. I mean, we're not the only brewers become distillers by any stretch, but we're doing a more pure play than Westward, a more pure play than Westland, because of the fact that we boil the wash and that we use a sanitary yeast strain and things like that really don't make any financial sense. They only are driven by our background and our interest in being kind of proving what can happen if you make a really high quality beer from a really local grain. So this whole thing is 13 years now in its experimentation. We've opened our second tasting room 2.5 years ago, put a farm to table restaurant in it, and I have to say that's really helped us a lot, because as wholesale market comes down, our direct to consumer has gone up. The whiskey club is also really helping us a lot. So that's going to keep us, in a different type of business. Direct to consumer is where we make the most margins, where we have the most true storytelling. And it's honestly what I hope is the future of whiskey sales, that you get to go do things like this by whiskey manufacturers, not just walk into a huge box store and hope that the shelf tag tells you something that you didn't know. Let's hear some more thoughts on this one. I see some really fun notes in the chat.
This is so rich. I mean, like you said, it's like drinking sherry. It's so overpowering the spirit. It's crazy.
This reminds me of the kind of spirit that my grandmother would soak a fruitcake in for the holidays. That
That's a really good the fruitcake for
super
sure.
rich,
Yeah.
really unctuous. It's got so many different flavors going on. And I'm
Yep.
like, I'm still, my mind is still kind of boggled at somebody would like trash a 200-year-old cask.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you are in Spain and you're going through those bodegas, they're old and they're tired and they're not making any money. And the thing that is the most valuable thing they have are their barrels and their property. Their property is always on the top of a hill, and it's this beautiful area where wind's coming through and the humidity is always 80%, and they water the floor sometimes to make sure that it stays as dark. It's just crazy. Moss is growing all over these barrels. Worms are in there, so all these barrels have all these wormholes in them. So the fact that they they don't see it like we see it. We're a new country, and they're like, I wish we had a new barrel, but we can't afford one, so we'll just keep using these old barrels. And we're like, wow, that's an amazing story, an amazing product that you have.
Yeah.
So I hope that the sherry industry blows up someday and that everybody can come back. But I am afraid that, once you sell some of those properties, you're never going to get that access to the sea breeze, and that's a major, major part of its flavor profile. So if you have the chance to get to the southern tip of Spain, now would be a really good time to go. Um, there in Portugal are two really great places to go learn about flavors. And over the years, with the EU and everything else, things are going to change a lot. So, well, other comments, other questions? I've got time, so don't hold back.
Well, people
I
are
have
thinking.
some technical questions.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, you mentioned pretty tight cut points.
Mhm.
Um, Anything about your stills and about kind of your anything else about your cut points? I thought maybe on the peated, it seemed like you were collecting some of those phenolic compounds that come across early and not the ones that come across late, things like that. Anything about how you decided about where you cut?
Yeah, Adam, it's a really interesting thing because we're trying to tell a story with so many variables. And so a long time ago, we made a decision that, we are not going to be making whiskey that we're going to try to put into cask for 10 or 15 or 20 years. We're going to make whiskey that the oldest whiskey we'll make is probably an 11-year-old whiskey. And honestly, it's probably going to be more like an 8-year-old whiskey or 9-year-old whiskey. So we don't need to cut long tail runs that are going to eventually transform into a delicious whiskey at 18 years. Same thing with the heads. We started at 147 proof, and we still cut at 147 proof. We used to cut tails at 120. We moved it to 121, and that's it. And so the reason that we're not cutting organoleptically, so by nose and taste on each batch, is because that's a really great way to both hit consistency and to target different conjugars coming off. But what we were trying to do is to say, if we kept something standard, what would the difference be? We know that it's not the cut points anymore that are being differentiated.
Yeah.
So it's the yeast, the fermentation, the barrel program, something like that. So that has still served us well. If we do experiment with anything, it would certainly be two things. One is starting to experiment more with early entry into hearts, but not getting into, the heads flavors, but we're honestly way past that when we start collecting. Um, and maybe even some longer tails runs and see what a wider cut would do. Having that as just, 2 or 3 batches that we put aside and monitor and watch and see how they mature over 3, 4, 5 years. So this is a generational learning thing, and we're the first generation, sadly. And then the second thing that it is really interesting. We've been using beer yeasts, and that's because we're brewers, and that's our whole philosophy of flavor. I want to continue using beer yeast, but there are so many interesting beer yeasts that we haven't tapped into. Belgium style yeast with high phenols, and nowadays there's also a lot of modified yeast that have all sorts of flavors that they're developing that aren't traditional yeast flavors, but are fruit flavors or floral flavors. And I'd be very interested to try some of those. The last thing I want to do is to harvest yeast from Washington and actually use naturally harvested, probably on the Bill Myers Colfax, Washington farm, because that's a grain we've been using for 7 years. But maybe one on the west side as well, and have some yeast strains that we know are native to where the barley comes from, and see what we can do with those. This is a big data project, so what you really need to do is you need to get the right variety grown at the right time, the right place, and then you got all your brewing techniques and all your water treatment and all of your mash temperatures and whatnot, and then of course all your fermentation conditions, the yeast temperature, the pH, the conditioning time, the temperature of that, residency time, and then everything that you know about distillation, and then all the wood program, and then of course the blending, and finally the bottling. So it is so much that I can see why Maker's Mark, for instance, had one whiskey that they had for 115 years before they made their second whiskey, and that was Maker's 46. And they took Maker's and put it into a barrel for 9 weeks with a maple stave and said, "Whoa, that's crazy. That's our second product in 115 years." And good for them, because that's a big innovation. We need more brewers jumping in, more science, the new distilling. It's like the American Society of Brewing Chemists, ASBC, but it's the American Society of Distilling Chemists now has a journal out. It's been about a year and a half in publication, and that's doing science around distillation. So I think we're going to start seeing a lot more beer science coming in. And I don't even know if I answered your
Yeah,
question,
that's
but I
great.
sure did ramble. So it must be the whiskey talking.
No, you did. That was my, yeah, that answered my question. I had one more thought, which is I'm used to American single malts often having a um, a flavor to them that I've described as husky, meaning sometimes it's a pleasant kind of rawhide, leathery, but can go unpleasant into cardboard and things like that. And it has a commonality with some of the places a lot of the places otherwise in the world that use like 6 row barley, like in India, where you can get these kind of oatmeal and those kinds of flavors. I don't get a single hint of that in any of your products, and I wondered if that's a function of barley types, if it's 6 row versus 2 row, or if it has to do with how you're mashing or anything like that. But it's very different from other American single malts.
Yeah, thank you. I think it has three sources. One of the most identifiable by me sources is what's the name of that cooperage that a lot of people use? They're the least expensive. They're the barrel mill. It's a lot of the times it's the barrel mill. The barrel mill's kiln dried. They're cheap. They're uh, very resiny, and any product that comes out tasting cardboardy, one of my first guesses is that they're using 30-gallon barrel mill casks. If that's not the case, or even if it is the case, the other thing that I ask is, what is your grain handling process? Do you roller mill and crack grist like a brewer does, or do you hammer mill and make a flour like bourbon does? But even though you're hammer milling it, you don't put it into a column still. You put it into a pot still. And now you've exposed so much more of the tannins and the husk flavor. And that's what you're
Yeah.
collecting in your whiskey. And once you've done that, you can't go back. You can't age it out. You can't work it out. So it's a problem with not enough information. Everybody reading old textbooks and trying to do what bourbon guys do, thinking they can do it on a pot still and not thinking through what that really means. And so it ends up being way better to try to follow a traditional Scottish process. But I'm going to tell you, not a lot of people do that. They still work with the bourbon grain handling. And then finally is the fermentation profile. A lot of people are like, oh, I've read that hot and fast is
You
best.
stomping around in here.
Uh, Jim, your mic is on, if that's what you meant to say. There you go. So a lot of them are thinking that that's the best way to do fermentation, but honestly, it's not. It's where you get a lot of yeast off flavors. So coming
That's
at it
interesting about the
from
grain handling because
yeah,
I know that in Scotland where they use hammer mills, they also use mash filters to get rid of
yes,
that.
yeah,
But
yeah. If you're
yeah,
using a mash filter, you're golden. But
yeah,
nobody in America uses the mash filter, sans a few large breweries. But if you're using, the traditional lauter, in Scotland they do three fills of a lauter. They don't do, continuous lautering the way most breweries do. But yeah, that's it. It's just one of those things that's going to take us a while. We haven't been doing this long enough as a country, making American single malt whiskeys to know how to do it. If you have a chance to taste, the Jim Beam, the Maker's Mark, the Jack Daniel's American single malt whiskey, it's a textbook example of what goes wrong when you treat barley like corn. And
mhm,
it's not. So it doesn't work well. And none of those have come out good. They've all come out bizarre.
yeah,
I was
great. Thank you.
curious about your because you use a mash bill that's more like an unhopped beer than anything else in the ASM market. Have you done any beer finishes?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We do. We
I
do. Cask exchanges.
okay. I
We
thought so, but I wasn't sure. So
yeah. We really enjoy them. They sell out pretty fast, and that's a fun way to kind of tell and market our story. We did a really neat whiskey. Let me see. Do I have a bottle here somewhere? Yeah. Let me grab this. This is the last beer I made at Copperworks is the Kilt Lifter is that Scotch Ale, and we made a. Let's see if I can get that to show up. Will that show up? That's really bright, isn't it? That is the Kilt Lifter. And
I
that
wanted to ask about that. Tell us about that.
so the Kilt Lifter is the Scotch ale, which has about 9 grains ingredients in it. Small amounts of peated malt, small amounts of unmalted barley, small amounts of wheat, and then about 5 different um, kilns of malted barley. So mainly 65% pale malt, and then caramel malts and crystal malts. That was the last beer that I had a hand in making at Pike Brewing. So that was 1991 when we made that. And about 5 years ago, we thought it'd be really fun to go back to the beer roots and work with the Pike. We've been working with them, which I keep forgetting to tell you guys. We don't own a brew house. We work with 4 different breweries to do all of our mashing. So when we were building, we decided to build the biggest stills we could fit through the door and get the biggest fermenters that we could fit through. So we have 60-barrel fermenters and what would be the equivalent of 30-barrel wash still. So it's 4,000 liters. And that's what we use um, to do all the distilling and fermenting. But the brewing, we go to the Pike Place Brewery. We did. To the Elysian Brewery. We did. They've closed. To Fremont Brewing. And to a very large tribal brewery, the first tribal brewery called Talking Cedar. All Washington breweries and distilleries. And what I really love about working with those people is that they are brewers. They know sanitation, they know yeast management, they know pH, they know the whole process of how to make a great beer, and they have great equipment. And so they do the mashing. We buy all the grain, we have it shipped directly to them, and then I go over and we work through every step of the process. And they want to target yield for me because oh, you're a distiller, we get to go for yield. And I'm like, never go for yield. Go for the target gravity, just like you would if you were brewing a beer. And so as we work through this, it caused us to even have a different relationship with the farms. We don't talk about what the price per bushel is. We talk about what the price per acre is, because we want them to take risk with us, grow a grain that maybe nobody else will buy, but we're very interested in it. And if we can get them to grow it, then we can make a whiskey that nobody else will make, because that grain isn't even available. And that's part of the story behind Baroness. So I don't even know if I finished answering your question, but I feel like part of the big difference is that we are really making a good beer, and we're making it really good breweries. And then we're bringing it back, adding a brewer's yeast, doing a fermentation, and then take that all the way through distillation and barrel aging.
No, that actually answered it. I knew some of it because I'm familiar with Talking Cedar and everybody else that you mentioned. So I'm like, yeah, but just the fact that you kind of go full circle and go back to some just beer aging and that sort of thing. I think that's kind of cool. Just
Yeah.
keep all of that in together.
Yeah. Yeah. I was the first brewer at Pike Brewing, but I hired Dick Cantwell when I was leaving Pike, and he went on to open up Elysian Brewery. And then when I was at Pyramid, I hired a guy named Scott, who ended up becoming the plant manager at Talking Cedar. So it's just all these people I know. I just became friends of Matt and Sarah from Fremont Brewing, but it all turned out just to be a big happy family of brewers that I knew. And I was able to work with really good brewers. And I'm going to say there are a lot of other distillers who know brewers really well and can have that. And that's one of the reasons that American single malt whiskey has in its standard of identity that it has to be mashed in America and distilled at a single distillery. Unlike Scotland, which says it has to be mashed and distilled at a single distillery. So we got the America thing in there so that we could partner with brewers, because we think that's where innovation's coming from in this category. And it was important to make sure that we didn't lose that opportunity just because Scotland doesn't do it that way.
Have you ever considered isolating the flavors of a different malt to see how and then you can blend them together? But like, because so many, I'm one of two, so many. The two distillers that I know that play with malt bills will do, the other one in Seattle does a 5 malt bill, right? But they don't do or a pale malt on its own. But nobody ever does like just 100% chocolate malt, 100% dark malt, 100% this malt, that malt, whatever, and lay down a couple of casks and see what it does on its own to just see what that. It may not be good, but it may be good when you combine it with other things. Have you ever considered doing something like that?
There is a theoretical limit to that, Adam, and that is when you caramelize and crystallize barley, you no longer have much fermentable sugar in it. And so, you said, could you make a, 100% black malt or no, I mean, it would not ferment. It would just be tea, right? So, if you get down, you start coming to, can you make a 30 Lovibond crystal malt? Yeah, it would be mostly non-fermentable, but a little bit of it would ferment. So the short answer is you really do have to use the majority of your grain bill has to be pales. And they can get a little darker than pale, but they can't get too dark or you actually don't have anything for yeast to eat. You have only flavor. So that flavor, unknown to me, because I really didn't understand the science when I started this, I didn't think that it would. I would assume that if it didn't ferment into alcohol, it wouldn't go through the stack of the still, right? But it does. That sugar carries through. Those flavors actually carry through because pot distillation is not a very precise instrument, and so it brings a lot of those compounds forward. That's the wonderful thing about it.
Very cool. Can you tell us about some other projects? You guys just opened a restaurant tasting area. Just so next time we're in Seattle, how do we find you? How do we support you? What do we do?
Yeah, well, I mean, the best way to support us, and thank you, Jane, for promoting it, is we ship to 37 states, and that Whiskey Club is a really good way to support us. The second way is if you are in Seattle, is to come visit us downtown Seattle. We do tours and workshops down there. We do a really fun 3 hour whiskey blending workshop. We also stole the idea from Balvenie, where you can go in and hand dip out using a dipping dog, hand dip a hand fill bottle that's only available there in Seattle. So that's a fun thing people do. And then up in Kenmore, which is 14 miles northeast of Seattle, so it's top of Lake Washington, is our new tasting room cocktail bar. It is 5,000 square feet. We got, I play bluegrass, so we got a bluegrass band every Sunday, and we got a farm to table restaurant that is just killing it. Got written up as top 25 restaurants in Seattle a couple of months ago. So it's a pretty fun place to visit. Just look us up online, copperworksdistilling.com, and you'll see both locations. And I would love to have you visit.
Very cool. Yeah, I was going to say, Jane is promoting the club very selfishly because she invested in the company, so she's a part owner. She just looks for
Yay!
dividends.
All right, thank you. That's wonderful. Well, it's another thing that we did when we look at an exit strategy and ways to grow. There's a lot of ways that a company can survive, and one of the ways is, finding a big daddy, a Diageo or a Monet Hennessy. That hasn't worked out too well for most of the companies that have done that right now, and we're glad that instead we're just under 30% owned by small investors, and I actually like to get that to 33%. Yes, thank you, Jane. I love having investors on calls. And one of the great things about having 2,000 investors is that you all act like brand ambassadors. You go out, you tell your story, you tell our story, you buy our products for birthday gifts and Christmas gifts, you come visit. You're just more active than a bank would be or than a Diageo account exec would be. So I also really appreciate how hard you work and how much you love us. So thank you. Keep preaching.
Jason, one of the things we like to do is we vote for our favorite of the night, and I'm sure you're curious to hear the results. What do you think was the group's favorite of everything we tasted tonight?
Well, from the notes, I'm going to say it very well could have been that single cask, the malt month. I was pleasantly surprised by all of the thumbs up on the color cask. So I'm going to go with one of those two.
All right,
Probably in
solid guesses. We've locked in your answers. The results are a four-way tie.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of variety, a lot of favorites throughout the night. It's very interesting. Four-way tie between Farmsmith, red wine, the single cask, and the color cask. Who voted for the color cask? I want to talk to those people. Who's picking the color cask as their favorite? Jane, of course you would. Of course you would.
Well, what's kind of cool about that is all of those whiskeys we made, and we made them to be different and for people to learn about them. And I think one of the things I'm happiest about is that if you don't like one of the Copperworks whiskeys, try another. We don't get a lot of, oh, I actually don't like any of your whiskeys, but this one. It's usually like, wow, all of your whiskeys I really like. They're different though. So, the Amaro Cask didn't hit number one on any of the people on here, or it barely did. But I will say that one sells like hell. I mean, it just sells like crazy in the tasting rooms, and people just go all over the map to find a way to get another bottle of it. So I am very happy about the fact that we have a limited amount of exposure. We're a small distillery, but a lot of big fans, and that's we're going to try to keep making interesting things for people.
For sure. I think the Amaro cask is an interesting conversation starter, kind of like some distilleries doing a ginger beer cask, or
Yeah,
I think years and years ago we tasted somebody that did like a vermouth cask, where it's not something you expect, and when it hits out of the park.
right. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I was interested to see that the Peatsmith didn't get any votes, but this is a smaller sampling. I'm going to say that is kind of a more normal expression for two reasons. One is that people who are Scotch malt whiskey fans of the Isla uh, flavor category don't find it smoky enough, and people who don't really like Isla like this, but it's still not their favorite. But there's this little segment of people who jump in and like, this is the most interesting thing. I make Rob Roy's now, I no longer make Manhattans. I'm making a Rob Roy out of this, and that's my house drink. And there's, Rob Roy is a Manhattan with a smoky whiskey. And I mean, it's just like, dang, that is a really, it's an honor to hear that. So I paired it with a whiskey dinner we did last night. Dinner that the restaurant did. $150 tickets. We sold 35 seats, and we had Rob Roy as uh, a second cocktail, and it was a really big hit with this smoked fish. So I'll just have to know when to use it.
It was my second favorite.
It actually was my
I just
second
like
as well. It's just a
just like
difficult
the
choice.
Farmsmith.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. We didn't get to rank stack them. We just said favorite, and that was it, right? I
Yeah,
got
like
it.
I said, I could rank choice everything, and I mean, like I would have had some that were tied for like 2 or 3 spots. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I agree with you, Jane. There was some really good stuff there. Anyway, I live in Oregon, so I'm going to try to get up there and see you guys.
That'd be
But that's,
great.
yeah,
That'd be great.
yeah,
Yeah.
my college
thanks.
roommate lives up there, so I'm overdue for a visit, and I figure I'll be dragging her down to the tasting room just for fun. So
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, uh, I am easy to reach. My contact information should be all over, but I'm going to put it in the chat here just so you have me. I am Jason at Copperworks Distilling.com, and call my cell phone or text me when you're coming in, because that's the way that you get me quickly. There's a million things. That's my cell phone number in there. And when you're visiting, just say, hey, we were online and we did this whiskey tasting, and Adam hooked us up, and I'd love to see you in person, give you a tour, taste some whiskeys with you. We can pull some cast samples or do something fun. So we'll make sure it's
Hey,
fun.
Jason, I just had something to say real quick. I grew up in the area, and I'm probably going to come up there and visit Copperworks.
Cool.
Everything you said about all of the, where you worked, Pyramid, Pike, these are all places I used to go to when I was younger. So I just have one thing to say to you. Go Hawks.
Yep. It's a hell of a season, isn't it? Hey, Jay, it's really good. It's been really fun reading your notes. I'm psyched to see that you're from here, and I really hope that you will use that contact information and reach out to me when you're
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. Would love to.
It'd be a blast to meet you guys. Well, it's such a privilege to be able to join you. And like I said, I've got more time. So if there's questions, I'll take them. And if you're ready to go to bed, we can do that too.
It's
Looks
really
like
great,
my
Jason. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed that tasting. That was really fantastic. We look forward to a round 3 with you at some point when we can put together 8 new expressions or 6.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely looking forward to visiting you up in Seattle. I'm well overdue to come visit the area as well. I'm not from up there, but I'm gonna wait till like August when it's nice and sunny.
Yeah, August is our busiest month, so there'll be a lot. Don't come in June unless you are specifically going to the World Cup. We are one of the 16 cities, and 1 million people are coming to visit that month.
Wow.
So it's not worth trying to fight that if you're not going specifically for that.
Sounds good. But on that, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge, and not all, but a small portion of your knowledge and wisdom. This has been really great, and we look forward to seeing more from Copperworks and seeing you again.
Well, thank you all. It was really fun meeting you, and
Thank
see
you.
you soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jason.
All right.
Thanks, Jason.